Hi, today I'm going to talk about how to manage multi-page projects in Clip2 Paint. And I'll be also sharing some tips to help streamline your comic making process. Most of the features I'll be covering are only available in the X version, but I'll also be talking about some feature and artistic advice that applies to both versions. As an example, I will be using my comic Another Bite, which I created for the Global Comic Awards 2025. Before we start, I just want to let you know that English is not my native language, so I recommend turning on the subtitles for better understanding. So, without further ado, let's start. The first thing we need to understand is, what is a multi-page project? In CSP, you can create both single canvas illustrations and full comics. When you go to File and New, you can choose the comic option or click Show a Comic Settings to access a variety of customization options for your project. Choosing these options will create a multi-page project, which is just another way of referring to your comic's main file. In this tutorial, we will be using Show All Comic Settings so you can explore all the features available in CSPX. So, what do all these options do? Before changing any settings, it's worth noting that you can choose from pre-made presets in the preset drop-down menu. I recommend them some research to find out which preset works best as a starting point for the type of comic you want to create. For this tutorial, I will be using the Shueisha Standard Manga preset, that is the same I use for my comic. As far as I know, it's commonly used as a standard in manga competitions. The only thing I will change is the basic expression color, so I can draw using colors in addition to black and white. Now, let's take a look at the options. In the first section, Canvas, you'll find all the classic canvas settings that you normally see when creating illustration, such as width, height, resolution, and the option to choose a pre-made layer template to start with. The recommended resolution for black and white comics is 600 dpi, while for color works, anything above 300 dpi is usually fine. As for the layer template, if you'd like to use one, I will leave a link in the description to a free material I created and uploaded to the Clip Studio Assets site. It's called Comic Layer Template, and it includes a pre-made frame and organized layers to help speed up your black and white comic making process. All you need to do to start using it is download it and select it in the template option. And that's it. The second section is the comic settings, where you'll find all the options related to the drawing area and trim area of the comic. I will be able to explain these settings more clearly once you take a look at the actual comic page soon. The third section is multiple pages. In the number of pages, you can choose how many pages your comic will have. And in the view setting, you can decide how you want to see your pages while editing. Page by page displays the pages side by side, like a traditional comic layout, while Webtoon shows design continuous through, just like a Webtoon. In combining into two-page spreads, you can choose whether your pages will be combined into two-page spreads or kept as individual pages. I highly recommend keep this option enabled, for a reason I'll explain later. The binding point option determines the reading direction of a comic, whether it follows a Western reading order, left to right, or a manga reading order, right to left. Choosing left binding sets your comic to follow Western reading order, left to right, while right binding sets to follow manga reading order, right to left. The last option here, Start Page, lets you choose whether your comic begins on a left or right page. This setting determines whether your comic starts with a single page or a double page spread, depending on the binding direction. If you choose left in binding, Western reading order, selecting from right as a start page will make your comic begin on a single page, while selecting from left we start with a double page spread. If you choose right in binding, manga reading order, selecting from left as a start page will make your comic begin with a single page, while selecting from right, we start it with a double page spread. It's not a big deal since you can easily add the last page later. On the right side of options, you'll find the cover page setting, which lets you add the front and back cover to your comic. It's pretty straightforward. Below that, we have the story information section, where you can add details like the title, subtitle, author name, and page numbers for your story. The last option is Folio, which lets you customize the page numbers, such as changing the color, font, or adding a border. Once you have decided on and customized your comic settings, just hit OK and start creating. One of the tips I will give is, always pay attention to the borders of your pages. The first thing to keep in mind when drawing your comic is the borders. Remember when I said I would explain the comic settings options in practice? Well, here we are. When you set the trim size and the inner border there, you are adjusting the size of these two areas in your comic page layout. If you are submitting to a contest or sending your comic to a publisher, it's important to check which presets or dimensions they require. If needed, you can adjust the settings here to match their specifications. The inner border is the area I have highlighted in bright green. This is your safe area. You can draw inside it without worry, because anything within this space will be guaranteed to appear when you print your comic. The dark green area is the inner side of the trim border. This area will also be printed, but you need to be careful when drawing near the horizontal edge of the page. When printed, content too close to the inner margin, the spine or center fold of the comic, might not appear clearly, or could get lost in the binding. So, on the left page, be careful with what you draw near the right edge, and on the right page, watch out for anything placed too close to the left edge. The last but not least border is the bleed border, here marked in red. This is an area already showed by placing any important artwork, since anything put here will not appear in the final print. You can check if your drawings are within the safe area by clicking this icon to access the 3D preview for binding. You can also open it by right-clicking anywhere in your comic. It's the last option on the list. This feature generates a 3D preview of how your comic would look if printed, based on the comic settings you configured earlier. It's a really helpful tool to make sure your artwork stays within the safe area, and that nothing gets lost too close to the comic's spine. Now that you know all of this, you'll be able to plan more effectively what to draw on your pages. It will also help you avoid mistakes when working on double page spread drawings, since now you know that anything drawn outside the trim border will be cut off during printing, like in this page for my comic. Even though there are two pages here, just one illustration is split across both pages. Fortunately, I knew the center were a bit cut off, so I made sure not to place any important elements here, not even the text. Another tip would be about how using a layer template can speed up the drawing process. Now that you know where to draw on the canvas, you can start sketching the pages, drawing the frames, and set up the layers, and that's a lot of work, right? Well, luckily, CSP has layering templates, which I mentioned earlier, that can be a lifesaver when it comes to streamlining the page setup process. As I said, I left in the description of the video a link to the template I created and used on my comic. The best part of using that template is that even when you divide the frame border, the new frames keep all the templates layer. My next tip is to draw using double page spreads. This idea may be a bit forgotten today in the era of digital reading, but reading physical comics, we are always getting glimpses or spoilers of the next page through the double page spread. That may sound like a downside, but you can use it to your advantage to build tension across the two pages, making readers earn to turn the page. Think about it, building tension across the double page spread is much harder if you deal with each page separately. That's why I recommend always planning and drawing with double page spreads in mind. This approach makes it easier to plan questions, sense interactions that will intrigue the reader and make them want to keep reading. I was able to come up with the scene of the enemy approaching the protagonist from behind by thinking about and viewing my history 2 pages at a time, so that the reader would want to turn the page to see what happens next. Use double page spreads. My last tip is about how to make your manuscript faster. Some people prefer to write the entire script first and then draw, while others like to write and draw simultaneously. I have tried both approaches, and honestly, neither worked for me. When I work the text first, I often end up needing to cut or add panels during the drawing phase. On the other hand, drawing while writing caused me to waste more time than I expected. For my comic, I tried something different. I wrote the entire script directly on the page, imagining each piece of the text inside the frame where it would go. This way, I could write the scene descriptions and visualize everything in my mind without having drawing it first, while simultaneously planning the panel layout all at the same time. After finishing the script, I simply set up the panels with the sketches, and my manuscript is finished. For me, doing this alongside using the template saved hours of work. It might sound a bit challenging, but I definitely recommend trying this workflow as an experiment, even if you are already comfortable with either of the two other methods. Well, that's it for this video. I hope my tips have been helpful to you in some way. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you!